Echeveria are without a shadow of a doubt some of the most popular succulents. I sell more Echeveria than any other succulent type. The leaf arrangement looks like a permanent flower and they come in many colors and variations. It is also a genus that has been heavily hybridized through crossbreeding, and as a result there is a huge number of Echeveria succulents to choose from. Due to their popularity, Echeveria can be pretty pricey, especially new hybrids or varieties. And so there is no wonder we all try and find the best way to propagate these beautiful plants, because one is never enough. To date, I've grown about 200 different Echeveria species, varieties and cultivars, and because I'm a plant geek, I try to propagate each and every single one of them. In this video, I'll share some of the things I've learned when propagating Echeveria succulents and what the best propagation methods are based on my experience. Although succulents in the Echeveria genus share the same traits and look similar, they can be quite different when it comes to reproduction. Some Echeveria grow loads of offsets and propagate well from leaves as well, while others can mostly grow solitary and are difficult to propagate from leaves. Because of this, there is not one single propagation method that works best for all Echeveria out there. This is incredibly frustrating, but it is what it is, and I'm afraid we'll have to do a bit of a deep dive into the way Echeveria can be propagated. Personally, I have this approach when it comes to finding out how to best propagate Echeveria I'm not yet familiar with. If the Echeveria is not a new hybrid and has been around for a while, I'll have a look online and on social media to see if there's any decent information available about the plant and the way it grows. If there's a few photos of it growing pups, this tells me that that particular Echeveria will eventually produce some. And so I just bide my time, repot and get it growing nice and healthy. And then all that is required is a bit of patience. I wait until the offsets start to appear. This can take one whole growing season and maybe a year before I get to propagate the offsets. When I get new Echeveria and they are big enough, I also take a few leaves off and see if I get a leaf baby. While most Echeveria are able to reproduce from leaf, there are a few species and cultivars that don't do this very well. And if they don't end up producing offsets or leaf babies, the best way to get more is to top or behead. Finally, Echeveria can be propagated from seed too, but personally I don't really go down this road with Echeveria simply because I cannot find a reliable seller of Echeveria seeds here in Australia. I've recently done a video on succulent seed scams, and if you think of raising Echeveria seeds, I would highly recommend watching it. Now let's have a look at each individual way Echeveria can be propagated in more detail. You may be familiar with the term hen and chicks. It refers to Echeveria that grow their chicks under the mother hen rosette. Many Echeveria grow lots of chicks, also known as offsets or pups, and can very easily be propagated by their separation. It's the best propagation method for these types of Echeveria. While they may often grow from leaf as well, the chicks will grow much faster and are easier to raise. There's a few easy rules I personally follow when propagating this way. First, I help the mother plant grow as best as possible by providing a big enough pot so it has plenty of space to grow. I also repot as soon as it gets root bound. Once the offsets start growing, I leave them to get big enough so they're easy to separate. They're usually good to go when the stalk is long enough to cut through or pull off. And lastly, I only propagate when the Echeveria are actively growing. The best time is spring, but in my part of the world, cuttings will easily root in summer and early autumn as well. The growing season can be different in other parts of the world, but I believe Echeveria offsets will root in spring anywhere in the world after dangers of frosts have passed. After separating, the offsets should be then left in a shaded dry spot for at least a day so the wound created by the cut heals. This will minimize the risk of harmful bacteria or fungus getting into the cuttings. After drying, they can be planted into small pots filled with succulent potting mix. Most Echeveria reproduce easily from leaves. If you're after volume rather than speed, leaf propagation is the better choice and will give you the most plants. Again, there are a few simple rules that will make all of this easier. Leaves that are dried up or in the process are unlikely to grow. You can get rid of those and start with the most bottom biggest leaves. If it's difficult to reach in, take the plant out of the pot. It will be much easier to remove the leaves. The full leaf has to come off the stalk. Broken leaves will probably not produce a leaf baby. Some Echeveria give up their leaves more willingly than others. If you keep breaking the leaves, try and dry out the plant first. Once the leaves are a bit wrinkly, they tend to separate easier. The leaves can then be kept in a dry but bright spot until the leaf babies start coming out. I prefer to put them in a dry tray first, but some people pop them on top of potting mix, which works as well. I like to do it this way because not all leaves will grow and sometimes the potting mix can rot them too. Baby leaves can start growing before roots, and most of the time I wait for the roots to grow too. I do not water at all until they are planted in pots. This is when I'd plant them into trays or pots, move them outside and start watering. There's quite a few Echeveria species and cultivars that mostly grow solitary or only produce 1 to 2 offsets every now and then and are not easy to propagate from leaves. This Echeveria agavoides rubin is one of them. I only have this many thanks to the wonders of tissue culture. But tissue culture is usually not available to the public, so your best bet is topping or beheading. If you're having no luck with offsets or leaves, chop the top. This can easily be done with a thin string such as fishing line or tooth floss. Aim for the lower part of the rosette just so there's a row or two of leaves left at the bottom. If you go too high, the top bit can fall apart. When you remove the top, treat it as a cutting and allow the wound to dry, then put up into a new pot filled with succulent potting mix. The bottom part can be left in a bright spot outdoors, though I'd recommend to not leave in very hot sun. If you have a shade cloth, pop it underneath. This is the same plant a month later and we already have 2 tiny heads. There will likely be at least 1 or 2 more. The bottom part can also be repotted into a slightly larger pot so the plant has enough energy to grow the new heads. Severely root-bound plants may have trouble regrowing after beheading. And that is it for today. I hope this video was useful, and if you'd like to add anything you can do so in the comments below. To learn more about succulents, hit the subscribe button or go to succulentgrowingtips.com. Thank you very much for watching.